$412,000. That's around the median price of a home in America now. Not a mansion, not a beach house in Malibu. Just the middle, just ordinary. And somewhere tonight, a 28-year-old is sitting in a one-bedroom apartment, paying $1,650 a month in rent, staring at those numbers on a phone screen, trying to figure out how people are actually doing this. They make maybe $58,000 a year. They have some savings. Not a lot. Maybe $12,000. Maybe less after the credit card bill hits. They have student loans. Car insurance that somehow keeps going up. Groceries that feel 40% more expensive than they used to. They keep hearing the same advice over and over. Just save more. Cut expenses. Wait for rates to come down. But every year they wait, the numbers move again. Houses get more expensive. Rent gets more expensive. Life gets more expensive. And quietly, without saying it out loud, they start wondering if the game was designed for somebody else. That feeling is more common than people admit, because most Americans are not lazy. Most people are not reckless. Most people are trying. They work hard. They pay bills. They try to save. But nobody really teaches them how wealth actually grows. School teaches people how to become employees. It rarely teaches people how assets work. And those are two completely different conversations. The average person spends years learning how to earn money without ever learning how money behaves after it's earned. That's the part that changes everything. Because eventually, if you pay attention long enough, you notice something strange. The people who build financial stability over time are not always the people with the biggest salaries. Sometimes they are teachers, nurses, contractors, small business owners, quiet people nobody notices. And yet somehow, 10 or 15 years later, they own things. Assets, rental properties, businesses, investment accounts. Not because they discovered some secret loophole. Usually because they started understanding one simple idea earlier than everyone else. Income pays for your life. Assets may help build your future. And once that idea clicks, you start seeing the world differently. You stop looking only at what things cost. You start asking what things produce. A car payment takes money every month. A productive asset might generate money every month. That mental shift sounds small. It is not small. It changes the direction of a person's entire financial life. And no, this is not about becoming rich overnight. Most real wealth is built slowly, almost painfully slowly at first. Social media skips that part because slow progress doesn't go viral. Nobody gets millions of views saying, "I consistently made thoughtful financial decisions for 14 years." But that's usually what actually happened. The beginning almost always looks unimpressive. It looks like somebody staying home on Friday night, reviewing spreadsheets instead of going out. It looks like learning how credit scores work, learning how mortgages work, learning the difference between good debt and destructive debt. That distinction matters because people hear the word debt and think danger automatically. And sometimes it is danger. High-interest debt can quietly destroy years of progress. But debt itself is just a tool. A mortgage on a carefully chosen property is not the same thing as financing vacations and restaurant bills you cannot afford. The problem is that most people were taught to fear all leverage equally without understanding how financially stable people sometimes use leverage carefully to acquire assets that produce value over time. Imagine somebody buying their first duplex. Nothing glamorous. Older building, working-class neighborhood. Maybe the kitchen hasn't been updated since 2004. Maybe the carpet smells slightly suspicious. But the numbers work. That matters more than granite countertops. One unit rents for $1,150. The other rents for $1,200. The mortgage, taxes, and insurance total $1,760. Maintenance reserve another couple $100. Suddenly, the owner realizes something emotionally powerful for the first time. Other people are helping pay down an asset they own. Not instantly, not magically. Slowly, month by month, quietly. That's when people begin understanding the difference between consumption and ownership. And the emotional part surprises them. Because the first property usually doesn't feel glamorous, it feels terrifying. The savings account drops close to zero after the down payment. Every repair feels personal. The water heater breaks on a Sunday morning. A tenant pays late. The gutters overflow during a storm. Nobody posts those moments online. But those moments are where financial education becomes real. Not theoretical, real. Because eventually, the owner realizes something important. Problems are not necessarily proof of failure. Sometimes, problems are tuition. Every mistake teaches something. Every repair teaches something. Every awkward conversation teaches something. The person who survives long enough to learn usually becomes more confident, not because they stopped feeling fear, but because they stopped letting fear make every decision for them. And this is where many people misunderstand wealth building entirely. They think successful investors must feel unusually confident all the time. Usually they don't. Most financially successful people spend years feeling uncertain. What separates them is often their willingness to act carefully despite uncertainty. They study, they prepare, they run numbers repeatedly. Then eventually they make one uncomfortable but calculated decision. And after that decision, the world starts looking different. A person who once checked Zillow like a depressing fantasy starts checking market rents, vacancy rates, neighborhood development plans, job growth, population trends. Their attention changes, and attention changes behavior. Suddenly, they notice a hospital expansion being built 3 miles away. They notice new businesses opening in overlooked neighborhoods. They notice where infrastructure money is moving. They stop looking at cities emotionally and start looking at them economically. Not because they became greedy, because they became aware. Awareness changes everything financially. And one of the biggest lessons people eventually learn is that wealth is often built through boring consistency rather than dramatic brilliance. The internet constantly sells excitement, fast money, quick flips, overnight success. Real life is usually quieter. The person building stability often drives the same car for years after they can technically afford another one. They continue budgeting after their income rises. They avoid lifestyle inflation. That matters because lifestyle inflation quietly traps millions of people. Every raise becomes a larger apartment. Every bonus becomes a newer car. Every improvement in income immediately disappears into recurring obligations. Then people wonder why they still feel financially stuck despite earning more than ever. Income matters. Of course it matters. But behavior matters too. A person earning $70,000 with discipline may slowly build more stability than someone earning $140,000 with uncontrolled spending habits. And over enough years, those differences become massive. One person accumulates assets, the other accumulates payments. The scary part is that from the outside, the second person may actually look richer for a long time. That's why appearances are financially dangerous. Somebody posting luxury vacations online may secretly be drowning in debt. Meanwhile, somebody quietly investing and living below their means may be building enormous long-term flexibility nobody sees. Real financial security is often invisible, and flexibility is the part people underestimate. They think wealth is mostly about buying expensive things. Eventually, many realize the real value is options. The option to leave a toxic job. The option to survive emergencies without panic. The option to help parents as they age. The option to spend more time with children. The option to breathe. Financial stress affects people emotionally more than they realize. It changes sleep, relationships, focus, health. Constant money, anxiety keeps the body in a permanent low-grade state of tension. That's why even modest financial improvements can feel life-changing emotionally. A fully funded emergency fund may not make someone rich, but it can make them feel less fragile. Paying off high-interest debt may not make headlines, but it can create breathing room for the first time in years. And breathing room changes how people think. Scarcity creates short-term thinking. Stability creates long-term thinking. That shift matters enormously, because once people stop living in constant financial survival mode, they start making decisions differently. They become more patient, more strategic, less reactive. They stop asking, "How do I get rich fast?" and start asking, "How do I become financially difficult to break?" That is a much better question. Durable financial lives are usually built for resilience first, growth second. And resilience comes from fundamentals: emergency savings, manageable debt, reasonable spending, consistent investing, multiple income sources over time when possible. Those things sound boring until an economic downturn happens, and suddenly boring looks intelligent. One reason long-term investing works for many people is because it removes the pressure to predict everything perfectly. Nobody consistently predicts markets perfectly. Not stocks, not housing, not interest rates. But disciplined behavior repeated over decades has historically rewarded patience. That's why retirement accounts matter. That's why compound growth matters. Money earning returns, then earning returns on those returns, creates momentum slowly at first, and then surprisingly fast later. Most people quit emotionally before compounding has time to become visible. That's true in investing. It's true in business. It's true in real estate. Progress is usually invisible before it becomes obvious. Think about somebody who buys a modest rental property at 29. For the first couple years, nothing looks dramatic. Small cash flow, minor appreciation, some headaches. But then 5 or 7 years pass. Rent rises gradually. Loan balance falls gradually. Equity grows gradually. Suddenly, what once looked insignificant becomes meaningful. Then they refinance carefully or use accumulated savings for another property. Not recklessly, carefully. The process repeats. And somewhere along the way, something psychologically important happens. They stop seeing themselves only as consumers participating in the economy and start seeing themselves as partial owners within it. That identity shift changes behavior permanently. But here is the part many people need to hear clearly. None of this requires perfection. financial improvement is not reserved for mathematical geniuses or people with perfect discipline. Most financially stable people are imperfect. They made mistakes, bought dumb things sometimes, missed opportunities, felt scared, started late. The difference is they stayed engaged long enough to improve. That's encouraging because it means financial literacy is learnable. A person who once avoided looking at their bank account can become financially organized. A person overwhelmed by investing vocabulary can eventually understand retirement planning. A renter can learn how mortgages work. Someone drowning in debt can slowly create structure. None of those changes happen overnight, but they happen. One of the most dangerous habits people develop is waiting for perfect conditions before taking action. Perfect rates, perfect timing, perfect confidence, perfect certainty. Life rarely offers those conditions simultaneously. Most meaningful financial progress begins while conditions still feel messy and incomplete. Somebody starts investing while still paying off debt. Somebody starts saving while rent is still painfully high. Somebody buys their first property while still feeling nervous. Courage in finance usually looks very ordinary from the outside. It looks like spreadsheets, reading, studying, asking questions, delaying gratification, staying calm when other people panic. Another thing people learn over time is that reputation quietly becomes an asset too. Responsible people attract opportunities. Lenders trust them more. Business partners trust them more. Employers trust them more. Reliability compounds. A person who consistently follows through for 10 years develops a completely different network than someone constantly chasing shortcuts. And that network matters because many opportunities never appear publicly. They move through relationships first, trust first, credibility first. That's one reason patience matters beyond money itself. Time allows credibility to accumulate. And interestingly, many people who eventually reach financial independence realize the emotional rewards are different than they expected. They thought the goal was luxury. Often, the real reward becomes peace. The ability to wake up without immediate panic. The ability to choose work instead of desperately needing every paycheck. The ability to think clearly about the future. The ability to help others. Freedom starts mattering more than appearances. That's why some financially secure people continue living relatively modest lives. Not because they lack ambition, because they understand the difference between status and security. One disappears quickly. The other changes generations. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is that building wealth is rarely one giant decision. It is usually thousands of small decisions repeated consistently. One unnecessary purchase avoided. One retirement contribution made. One investment book read instead of ignored. One side skill developed. One careful opportunity taken. One impulsive financial mistake avoided. Small choices seem powerless in the moment because results arrive slowly. But time magnifies behavior. Tiny decisions repeated for years eventually become lifestyles. Then lifestyles become outcomes. Somewhere tonight, somebody is still sitting on that apartment couch, scrolling through home prices and feeling behind. Maybe they think they missed their chance. Maybe they think everybody else figured something out they didn't. But the truth is that most financially capable people once felt exactly the same confusion. The difference is that eventually they stopped looking for emotional certainty and started building practical understanding instead. They learned the math. They improved habits. They became more intentional. And little by little, they built systems that slowly started working in their favor instead of against them. That process is available to more people than they realize. Not equally, not instantly, not without effort, but possible. And in many cases, the first real step is smaller than people imagine. It might just be finally learning how money actually works, instead of assuming everybody else magically understands it already.